The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the most imposing structure in known space. Ambassador Kim Min-ho stepped through the entrance, his polished black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast against the shimmering crystalline walls that rose hundreds of meters above him. The chamber itself was a marvel of alien engineering, with translucent surfaces that caught and refracted light from artificial suns positioned strategically around the circular arena. Min-ho had been to this chamber many times before, but today felt different. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an electric tension that made his skin prickle. Behind him, Lieutenant Park Jisoo followed closely, her tablet displaying the latest intelligence reports from the outer colonies. Her usually steady hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the data one final time. The chamber was arranged in concentric circles, with each species occupying their designated section based on their political influence and military strength. At the very center, on the highest platform, stood the representatives of the HFY Empire. Their section was a monument to their dominance. It's constructed from dark metals and decorated with the skulls of conquered enemies. War Commander Vexther dominated the central speaking platform like a living mountain. His massive frame stretched nearly 3 meters tall, covered in thick scales that shifted from deep green to black, depending on the angle of light. Rows of sharp teeth gleamed when he opened his mouth, and his yellow eyes burned with the confidence of a predator who had never known defeat. Battle scars crisscrossed his hide, each one a testament to his personal combat experience across dozens of worlds. Around the chamber, representatives from 17 different species watched nervously. The ethereal Zephyrians floated in their specialized containment fields, their translucent bodies pulsing with nervous energy. These beings had once controlled vast trade networks across 3 galaxy arms, but now they served as little more than bookkeepers for HFY economic interests. Their containment fields were not just for environmental protection, but also served as a constant reminder of their captivity. In another section, the insectoid hive minds clustered together, their chittering communication creating a constant low buzz throughout the chamber. These creatures had once been master strategists, capable of coordinating million-unit swarms across multiple star systems simultaneously. Now their tactical genius was used only to optimize resource extraction for their HFY masters. Min-ho observed each species carefully as he made his way to the human delegation area. The bird-like Scarthon kept their feathers pressed flat against their bodies, a clear sign of submission. The silicon-based corns stood motionless, their crystalline forms reflecting the chamber's light in fractured patterns that seemed to mirror their broken spirits. Every conquered species bore the same expression of resigned defeat. The human section was positioned deliberately in the lower tier, a calculated insult that placed them among the newest and supposedly weakest members of the galactic community. Min-ho took his place at the speaking podium, his back straight and his expression calm, despite the overwhelming presence of the war machine that surrounded him. Vexther's voice boomed across the chamber when he began to speak, the sound enhanced by the chamber's acoustics until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Humans," he began, the word itself delivered like a curse. "Your pathetic expansion ends now. For too long you have spread your weak flesh across systems that belong to the strong." The war commander gestured broadly with one massive clawed hand indicating a holographic display that materialized above the chamber. The display showed the current territorial boundaries, with human colonies marked in blue and HFY territory in aggressive red. The human settlements appeared as small, isolated dots scattered across the galaxy's edge. "The HFY Empire claims your outer colonies," Vexther continued, his voice growing louder with each word. "Your options are simple. Submit to our rule, accept your place as servants, or face the glory of battle against warriors who have never known defeat." Lieutenant Park Jisoo leaned closer to Min-ho, her voice barely audible above the chamber's ambient noise. "Sir, our colonies have 3 million civilians. The latest reports show families, children, elderly people who chose those worlds specifically because they wanted to live in peace." Min-ho nodded almost imperceptibly, never breaking his steady gaze with Vexther. "I hear you, Lieutenant," he replied quietly, his voice carrying the weight of responsibility for every human. "Life in the outer systems, The war commander's laugh echoed through the chamber like thunder, a sound that had preceded the destruction of countless worlds. 17 species have knelt before Kethfer might, he declared, gesturing toward the conquered representatives around them. Each one thought they were special, that their technology or their courage would save them. Oh, your soft flesh will make 18. The other species in the chamber seemed to shrink further into themselves at this reminder of their fate. The Zephyrian's light pulsed more rapidly, while the hive minds, chittering, grew more agitated. They had all heard similar ultimatums before. Their own defeats. Minho stood slowly, his movement deliberate and controlled. Despite being dwarfed by the massive alien warrior above him, he projected an air of calm authority that caused a ripple of surprise throughout the chamber. His voice, when he spoke, carried clearly across the vast space without any need for amplification. "You want war?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. The chamber fell completely silent, even the ambient systems seeming to pause in anticipation. Minho let the silence stretch for several heartbeats, his eyes never leaving Vexther's face. "Then you've chosen death," he concluded, his words delivered with the finality of a judicial sentence. The chamber erupted in what the Kethfer delegation took for human desperation. Several alien species made sounds that approximated laughter, while others simply stared in disbelief at what they perceived as suicidal bravado. Vexther's amusement was clearly visible, his massive form shaking with what humans might have mistaken for mirth, but was actually anticipation of the slaughter to come. But Minho was already turning away from the podium, his diplomatic mission complete. Lieutenant Park Jisoo hurried to match his pace as they walked toward the chamber's exit, her tablet forgotten in her hands as she tried to process what had just occurred. The massive doors slid shut behind them with the same soft hiss that had announced their arrival, but the galaxy had fundamentally changed in the space between those sounds. War had been declared, and humanity had accepted the challenge with a confidence that would soon prove to be far more than mere bravado. The deep space monitoring station hung in the void like a metal flower, sensor arrays reaching out across dozens of light years to track every ship movement in the galaxy. Admiral Lee Hyjin stood at the center of the command deck, her weathered face illuminated by the soft blue glow of holographic displays that surrounded her like a three-dimensional constellation of information. 3 days had passed since Ambassador Kim Minho delivered humanity's response to the Kethver ultimatum, and the galaxy was already beginning to shift like pieces on a massive game board. The displays showed red dots moving across star charts, each one representing a Kethver warship positioning itself for what their commanders believed would be a quick and decisive victory. Commander Yoon Daeho approached with a data tablet in his hands, his usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious concern. He had served under Admiral Hyjin for 15 years, through border skirmishes and diplomatic crises, but nothing had prepared him for the scale of what they were witnessing.
"Admiral?"
he said, his voice tight with tension. "The intelligence networks are reporting massive movement across all Kethfer territories. They're mobilizing everything they have." Hyjin turned from the displays to face her longtime colleague. "Define everything, Commander." 12 full battle fleets, ma'am. Our estimates put their total strength at approximately 2,000 ships, ranging from light cruisers to their massive dreadnoughts. They're pulling vessels from garrison duties, border patrols, even ceremonial squadrons. Daeho paused, running calculations on his tablet. This represents nearly their entire military capability. The Admiral nodded grimly, her mind already working through the implications. The Kethver were committing their full strength to what they saw as a minor police action against an upstart species. It was exactly the kind of overconfidence that had allowed them to dominate the galaxy for centuries. "And our response?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Daeho's expression grew even more serious. "Defense Minister Choi Soo-min has authorized Protocol 7. The command deck fell completely silent. Every officer and technician within earshot stopped their work, turning to stare at the Admiral with expressions of shock and disbelief. Protocol 7 was legendary within military circles, spoken of in whispers and theoretical discussions. but never actually implemented. Lieutenant Kim Young-ho, the station's communications officer, broke the silence with a nervous laugh. Sir, did you say Protocol 7? I thought that was just a training exercise. It was never just a training exercise, Hajin replied quietly. Protocol 7 hasn't been used since the colony wars ended 50 years ago, because we hoped we would. Never needed again. The Protocol 7 authorization began spreading through military channels within minutes. On Earth, in the massive government complex that served as humanity's administrative center, President Kong Murray stood before the emergency session of the Colonial Congress. The chamber was packed with representatives from every human world, their faces reflecting the same mixture of fear and determination that had characterized humanity's greatest moments throughout history. Citizens of humanity, President Kang began, her voice carrying across the chamber and simultaneously being broadcast to every human settlement across 100 worlds. We face an enemy that mistakes our preference for peace as weakness. Kethper Empire believes that because we choose diplomacy over aggression, we are incapable of defending ourselves. The president paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. Today we remind the galaxy why that assumption is fatal. Today we show them what happens when you threaten human families, human children, human homes. The transformation that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Within hours of the Protocol 7 authorization, humanity's vast civilian infrastructure began its metamorphosis into something far more dangerous. The same industrial capacity that had built generation ships, terraforming equipment, and trade vessels now turned toward a single, focused purpose. Captain Song Ji-hoon stood on the observation deck of the patrol vessel, Soul's Pride, watching the incredible transformation taking place at the Titan shipyards. The massive construction facility orbited a gas giant in the Sol system. Its countless berths, usually filled with cargo haulers and passenger liners. Now, those same berths were being retrofitted with military-grade fabricators. Look at that, he said to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Han Soyoung, pointing toward a massive cargo ship being modified in the nearest berth. Yesterday, that was a grain hauler. Today, they're installing weapon systems that could take out a cruiser. The ship in question was the civilian vessel Pusan Merchant, a kilometer-long bulk carrier designed to transport agricultural products. Between the farming worlds and the core systems, teams of technicians swarmed over its hull, installing plasma cannons where cargo bays had been, adding armor plating over its engines, and retrofitting its navigation systems with military-grade targeting computers. Lieutenant Han watched the transformation with a cold smile. They really think we're just merchants and farmers, she observed, her voice carrying a hint of dark amusement. Let them, Captain Song replied, his tone matching hers. Every species in the galaxy sees our cargo ships and thinks we're weak. They see our mining operations and think we're simple. They don't understand that the same technology that moves mountains can destroy fleets. Throughout human space, similar transformations were taking place on a scale that defied comprehension. The asteroid mining operation at Vesta had retooled its mass drivers to launch projectiles at relativistic speeds. The fabrication plants on Luna were producing military-grade electronics instead of consumer goods. The massive shipyards above Mars were working around the clock, their human crews supplemented by automated systems that had been designed for peaceful construction but proved equally effective at building instruments of war. On the agricultural world of New Sol, farming equipment was being converted into mobile weapons platforms. The same systems that had been used to terraform hostile worlds were being adapted to create military installations. Even the civilian transport network was being militarized, the passenger ships receiving stealth modifications and cargo vessels being equipped with sensor arrays. The speed of the transformation shocked even humanity's own military leaders. Admiral Hyjin received hourly reports that seemed almost impossible to believe. Industrial output was increasing exponentially, with entire sectors of the civilian economy shifting to military production without missing a beat. It's like watching a sleeping giant wake up, Commander Yoon observed, reviewing the latest production figures. I never realized how much capacity we had hidden in civilian systems. That was the point, Admiral Hyjin replied. The Kethver spent centuries building a military machine. We spent centuries building a civilization. Now they're about to learn the difference. The galaxy watched in growing unease as humanity's response became clear. This was not the desperate preparation of a doomed species, but the methodical mobilization of a civilization that had been designed from the ground up to survive and thrive in the harshest environments imaginable. War Commander Vexler stood in the command center of his flagship Crimson Talon, surrounded by displays that showed the might of the Kethfer Empire in all its terrifying glory. The massive vessel stretched for kilometers, its hull painted in the deep red that had become synonymous with conquest across 17 star systems. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, he could see the rest of his fleet arranged in perfect formation, each ship positioned according to battle doctrines that had remained unchanged for centuries. The tactical displays showed thousands of vessels spread across multiple star systems, from the smallest patrol craft to the mighty dreadnoughts that served as mobile fortresses. Each ship bore the scars and decorations of previous victories, their hulls marked with the symbols of conquered civilizations. The Kethvar war machine was not just a military force, but a living monument to their dominance over the galaxy. Subcommander Zirkle approached with the latest intelligence reports, a scaled face showing the excitement that all Kethvar felt before battle. War Commander, our forward scouts report interesting developments in human space. The humans flee to their colonies, abandoning the outer systems entirely. Vexler's massive form straightened with satisfaction, his yellow eyes gleaming with predatory pleasure. As expected, he rumbled, his voice carrying the confidence of a warrior who had never known defeat. They scatter like prey animals before the hunt. They will beg for mercy when we arrive at their pathetic settlements. The war commander gestured toward the displays. A red indicator showed Kethvar forces advancing steadily toward human territory. Deploy the 3rd and 5th fleets to the outer colonies. We will sweep them clean of human presence, then move toward their core worlds. This campaign will be over within days. But far from the celebrating Kethvar fleets, in the asteroid fields of the Kepler system, something extraordinary was taking place. Admiral Lee Hai-jin walked through corridors that had not existed 2 weeks earlier, her boots clicking against metal floors that still bore the marks of rapid construction. The facility around her was a marvel of human engineering, carved directly from the heart of a massive asteroid and converted into a fortress that would have been impossible for any other species to construct. The station had been designated Incheon, named after the historic port city that had once been the gateway to Korea. Now it served as a gateway of a different kind, a checkpoint between human space and the advancing Kethvar forces. The asteroid's natural composition had been enhanced, with layers of armor plating and defensive systems that turned the entire facility into a weapon of incredible destructive power. Status report, Admiral Hai-jin commanded as she entered the main operations center. A vast chamber filled with holographic displays and control stations operated by hundreds of technicians. Commander Yoon Dae-ho looked up from his tablet, his expression mixing pride with disbelief at what they had accomplished. All defensive platforms are operational, Admiral. The mining lasers have been converted to military-grade weapon systems. The automated defense grid is online and responding to our command protocols. He gestured toward a display showing the asteroid field around them. The Kethvar won't recognize this system when they arrive. We've turned every piece of space debris into a potential weapon, every mining platform into a defensive position. The entire asteroid belt is now a fortress. The transformation had been accomplished using the same technology that had allowed humanity to establish colonies in the harshest environments. Automated mining systems had been reprogrammed to excavate defensive positions. Construction robots had worked around the clock to install weapon systems and armor plating. The same industrial capacity that had built generation ships and terraforming equipment now created instruments of war. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away, Captain Song Ji-hoon's ship emerged from hyperspace near the Zephyrian homeworld. The Soul's Pride had been modified extensively since the Protocol 7 authorization, its hull now bristling with sensor arrays and communication equipment that allowed it to operate far beyond the range of traditional military vessels. The Zephyrian homeworld appeared on the main display as a sphere of swirling gases and energy fields, beautiful and alien in ways that human eyes could barely comprehend. The ethereal beings who lived there existed in a state between matter and energy. Their consciousness spread across vast networks of crystalline structures that floated in the planet's atmosphere. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Han Soyoung from the communications station, "we're receiving coded transmissions from the Zephyrian Council. They're expressing interest in what they call alternative arrangements." Captain Song nodded thoughtfully. The Zephyrians had been among the first species conquered by the Kethfer. Their advanced technology and peaceful nature making them valuable slaves but poor warriors. For decades, they had served as administrators and technicians for the Kethfer Empire, their natural abilities exploited to manage the complex logistics of galactic conquest. "Tell them," Song said to his communications officer, "that humanity remembers its friends. Tell them that we offer something the Kethfer never could. Genuine partnership between equals." The message was transmitted using encryption methods that the Zephyrians had developed but been forbidden to use for their own communications. Within hours, similar transmissions were being sent to every corner of Kethfer space, carrying the same message of hope to species that had almost forgotten what freedom looked like. On the insectoid homeworld of the hive minds, swarms of the creatures gathered in their vast underground chambers to receive the human message. These beings had once been master strategists, capable of coordinating millions of individual units in perfect harmony. The Kethfer had broken their swarm networks and forced them to work in isolation, but the human offer of partnership began to reawaken their collective consciousness. Similar conversations were occurring throughout Kethfer space. The bird-like Scarthon, whose fleets had once ruled the trade routes between star systems, learned that humanity offered them the chance to fly free once again. The silicon-based Quarrens, whose crystal cities had been strip-mined to build Kethfer weapons, discovered that humans valued their artistic achievements as much as their industrial capacity. Each species received a message, tailored to their specific situation and capabilities. The humans had spent months studying the cultures and histories of the conquered peoples, learning about their achievements before the Kethfer domination. Now they offered not just liberation, but the chance to reclaim their lost heritage and contribute to a galactic civilization. Based on cooperation rather than conquest, the responses came slowly at first, transmitted through hidden channels and coded in languages that the Kethfer had forbidden. But as word spread, the trickle of communication became a flood. Species that had been enemies under Kethfer rule began to coordinate their efforts. Underground networks that had been dormant for generations suddenly came alive with activity. War-Commander Vexter remained unaware of these developments as his fleets continued their advance toward human space. His intelligence networks, dependent on fear and domination, failed to detect the subtle changes occurring throughout his empire. The conquered species had learned to hide their true thoughts and feelings, and now that skills served them well as they prepared to reclaim their freedom. The stage was set for a conflict that would reshape the galaxy. But the true battle lines were far more complex than either side had initially imagined. The twisted fabric of space rippled and tore as the Kethfer Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the new Busan system. 50 massive warships materialized in perfect formation, their dark hulls gleaming with the menacing beauty that had terrorized countless civilizations. Fleet Commander Zarketh stood on the bridge of his flagship, the destroyer Bonecrusher, anticipating another easy victory against what his intelligence reports described as a simple farming colony. New Etana had been established 30 years earlier as an agricultural world chosen for its fertile soil and moderate climate that made it perfect for growing the food crops that fed humanity's expanding colonial empire. The planet's surface was covered with vast farms and small rural communities, populated by families who had chosen a quiet life far from the political complexities of the core worlds. "Target acquisition complete," reported Subcommander Veltar, his clawed fingers dancing across the tactical display, scanning for defensive installations and military vessels. Zarketh expected to see the typical defenses of a farming world. Perhaps a few patrol boats and some basic orbital platforms. Instead, His sensor officer's voice carried a note of confusion that made the fleet commander's blood run cold. Sensors are detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system. It's multiple defensive platforms, weapon installations, and what appears to be a fully operational military grid. Impossible, Zarketh snarled, his massive form leaning forward to study the displays himself. The screen showed a system that had been completely transformed from a peaceful agricultural world into a fortress that rivaled the most heavily defended Kethfer military installations. Weapons platforms hung in space like deadly flowers, their energy cores pulsing with barely contained power. The asteroid belt that had once been mined for construction materials now bristled with defensive stations. Each chunk of rock had been hollowed out and fitted with weapon systems that could engage targets across multiple light minutes. The space around the planet itself was filled with orbital platforms that had clearly been constructed using the same technology that built generation ships. But repurposed for war, Captain Kim Woojin stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Gwangju, watching the Kethfer fleet through displays that showed their formation in perfect detail. His ship was one of dozens that had been converted from civilian vessels, its hull reinforced with armor plating and its cargo holds replaced with weapon systems that had been designed for entirely different purposes. "Communications, open a channel. To the Kethfer fleet," he ordered calmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades managing commercial shipping operations before the war began. The transmission crackled to life, carrying his words across the void between the opposing forces. "Kethfer fleet, you are in violation of human space. This system is under the protection of the Human Colonial Defense Force. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Zerka's laughter echoed across the communication channel, sound that had preceded the destruction of countless worlds. "One human ship against 50? You die with honor, at least." "I will ensure your death is quick," the fleet commander gestured to his weapons officer, preparing to give the order that would reduce the human vessel to scrap metal. But Captain Kim had no intention of fighting alone. "All units execute pattern Delta," he transmitted on the human tactical frequency. The space around New Busan suddenly came alive with activity. What had appeared to be empty void revealed itself to be filled with human vessels, their stealth systems deactivating in perfect coordination. Converted cargo ships, mining vessels, and construction platforms emerged from hiding positions throughout the system, each one armed with weapons that had been designed for entirely different purposes. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for generations. The Kethfer fleet, arranged in their traditional formation that had conquered 17 civilizations, found themselves facing an enemy that fought according to entirely different rules. Human tactics had been developed not for glory or honor, but for absolute efficiency. The plasma lances that had once been used to cut through asteroids and mining operations now sliced through Kethfer shields as if they were made of paper, targeting computers that had coordinated the movements of massive cargo fleets now, calculated firing solutions with deadly precision. Even the simple mass drivers that had launched their containers between mining stations became weapons of incredible destructive power when loaded with dense metal projectiles. Zarketh watched in horror as his fleet was systematically destroyed. Around him, humans did not engage in single combat or follow the traditional rules of warfare. Instead, they coordinated their attacks with machine-like precision, focusing their fire on critical systems and exploiting every weakness in Kethfer. "Ship design. Return fire. All ships, return fire," he screamed, but his orders were meaningless. The human vessels moved like schools of fish, coordinating their movements through communication systems that had been designed to manage commercial shipping across multiple star systems. They appeared from unexpected angles, struck with devastating effectiveness, and disappeared back into the void before the Kethfer could respond. The destroyer Black Fang exploded in a brilliant flash of light as a converted mining ship struck its reactor core with a precisely aimed plasma lance. The cruiser Death's Edge was torn apart by a barrage of projectiles launched from what had once been a grain hauler. Ship after ship fell to weapons that had never been designed for warfare, but proved devastatingly effective when wielded by people who understood them perfectly. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes from the first shot to the last. When the explosions faded and the debris clouds settled, 49 Kethfer ships had been reduced to scattered wreckage drifting through the void. Only Zarketh's flagship remained, its hull punctured in dozens of places and its weapon systems completely disabled. Captain Kim Woo-jin studied the damaged Kethfer vessel through his tactical displays, expression calm despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. His communications officer looked up from her station, awaiting orders. "Sir, the surviving ship is trying to repair its hyperspace drive. Should we finish them?" Kim considered for a moment, then shook his head. "No, let them go. But first, send a message." The transmission was directed not just to the surviving Kethfer ship, but to their entire fleet network, ensuring that every commander in their military would receive the same warning. Kim's voice was cold and professional, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Send a message," he ordered. "Tell them what happens when they threaten our civilians. Tell them that this is what awaits any force that enters human space with hostile intent. Tell them that we do not seek war, but we will not hesitate to defend our people." The damaged Kethfer flagship limped away from the new Busan system, sensors recording the incredible transformation that had taken place in what they had expected to be a defenseless farming world. Behind them, the human fleet began the process of salvaging useful technology from the wreckage, already planning improvements to their defenses based on what they had learned from the encounter. The message would reach Kethfer command within hours, carrying with it the first real evidence that humanity was not the weak prey they had assumed, but a civilization that had simply chosen peace over war until forced to defend itself. The massive human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kethfer home system, like a steel storm breaking across the darkness of space. Admiral Lee Haijin stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Seoul, watching through the transparent aluminum viewports as hundreds of human vessels took their positions in a formation that had never been seen before in galactic history. The ships stretched from converted cargo haulers to purpose-built warships, each one representing the incredible transformation that humanity had undergone in the months since the war began. The Seoul itself was a marvel of human engineering. Built in the orbital shipyards above Mars, using technology that had been developed for peaceful exploration but proven equally effective for warfare, its hull gleamed with the same silver-white finish that had marked human vessels for generations. But now it bristled with weapon systems that could reduce entire fleets to debris in minutes. "Fleet status report," Admiral Haijin commanded her, voice carrying the calm authority that had made her one of humanity's most respected. Military leaders, even before the war began, Commander Park Jasu, who had served as her aide during the early diplomatic missions, looked up from the tactical displays that showed the positions of every human vessel in the system. "All ships report ready for battle, Admiral. The converted civilian vessels are performing beyond expectations, and the new military construction is operating at full capacity." Through the viewports, they could see the Kethvar homeworld hanging in space like a red jewel, its surface marked with the dark scars of industrial facilities and military installations. The planet had been the center of galactic power for centuries, the beating heart of an empire that had crushed 17 civilizations beneath its iron grip. Around the planet, the remnants of the once mighty Kethfer fleet scrambled to form defensive positions. What had once been thousands of vessels was now reduced to perhaps 300 ships, many of them damaged from previous battles and operating with skeleton crews. The survivors of the New Busan massacre had carried word of human military capability back to their commanders. But the Kethfer leadership had refused to believe that their empire could be threatened by what they still saw as a collection of farmers and merchants, their brave Commander Park admitted. Watching the enemy ships move into formation despite being outnumbered by more than 2 to 1, "I'll give them that much." Admiral Haijin nodded thoughtfully as she observed the Kethfer defensive positions. Even facing certain defeat, the alien warriors maintained their discipline and prepared to fight to the last ship. It was the kind of courage that had built their empire, but also the kind of stubborn pride that had made this war inevitable. Bravery without wisdom is just another word for extinction. she replied quietly, her words carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many good people die because of poor decisions made by their leaders. The battle that followed was brief, but decisive, a demonstration of what happened when an industrial civilization fully committed to warfare. The human fleet moved with the same coordination that had once managed supply chains across hundreds of worlds, but now that organizational skill was focused on destroying the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever known: the weapons. That had been designed to mine asteroids and construct space stations proved devastatingly effective against enemy warships. The same mass drivers that had launched cargo containers between star systems now hurled projectiles at speeds that made them nearly impossible to intercept. The plasma cutters that had carved up derelict ships for salvage sliced through Kethver armor like it was made of paper. But it was not just the weapons that made the difference. Human industrial capacity had produced not just superior technology, but superior numbers. For every Kethver ship that fell, there were 3 human vessels, ready to take its place. The same factories that had built generation ships and terraforming equipment now produced warships at a rate that defied belief. The Kethver fought with the desperate fury of cornered predators, but their traditional tactics were useless against an enemy that treated warfare as a problem to be solved rather than a contest of honor. Human vessels coordinated their attacks through communication systems that had been designed to manage commercial shipping, creating a level of tactical coordination that the Kethver had never encountered. Within hours, the space around the Kethver homeworld was filled with the wreckage of their once proud fleet. The survivors limped back toward the planet's surface, their ships too damaged to continue fighting. The most powerful military force in galactic history had been systematically dismantled by a species that had been building starships for less than a century. As the enemy homeworld lay defenseless before the human fleet, Admiral Hyjin faced a choice that would define the future of galactic civilization. The orbital bombardment systems were ready. The weapons that could turn the planet's surface into molten glass were charged and targeted. A single order from her would complete the destruction of the Kethver Empire and ensure that they could never again threaten human colonies instead. She turned to the communications station and opened a channel that would broadcast to every corner of the planet below. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the authority of someone who had the power to destroy worlds, but chose a different path. "People of Kethver," she said. Her words transmitted to every communication device on the planet's surface. "Your leaders chose war. We chose to end it. Your military forces have been defeated, your fleets destroyed, your empire broken. But you, the people of this world, still have a choice." The planet below was silent, billions of Kethver civilians listening to the words of the human commander who held their fate in her hands. They had been taught that defeat meant extinction, that conquered peoples were enslaved or eliminated. The concept of mercy from a victorious enemy was foreign to their understanding. "Surrender now," Admiral Hyjin continued, "and you will find that humanity judges species not by their past, but by their future. We do not seek revenge or domination, seek peace, and we are willing to share that peace with any who choose to embrace it." The response came slowly, transmitted from the planet's capital city where the surviving Kethver leadership had gathered to await their fate. The surrender was unconditional. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for centuries reduced to a single world seeking mercy from those they had tried to destroy. 6 months later, Ambassador Kim Minho stood once again in the Galactic Council chambers. But everything had changed. The chamber itself had been rebuilt, the oppressive architecture of Kethver dominance replaced with something more open and welcoming. The seating arrangements no longer reflected military hierarchy, but represented the equality of all member species. The Kethver delegation sat not as conquerors, but as equals, their representatives speaking quietly with the human ambassador about trade agreements and cultural exchange. The Zephyrians floated freely in the chamber, their containment fields replaced with environmental suits that allowed them to interact normally with other species. The hive minds chittered among themselves, their collective consciousness restored, and their strategic abilities once again used for peaceful purposes. The old council ruled through fear. Minho addressed the assembly, his voice carrying to every corner of the rebuilt chamber. This council will govern through cooperation, through mutual respect, and through the understanding that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before delivering the final warning that would ensure the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. And should any species threaten that peace, should any force seek to return to the old ways of conquest and domination, well, they know what humanity does to those who choose war. The chamber remained silent, but it was no longer the silence, a fear that had characterized the old council. It was the silence of respect, the recognition that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to choose when destruction was necessary and when mercy was possible.